Hi and welcome to the assembly video for Haven Studio keyboards. I'd just like to start by saying thank you for your interest and your support. Whether you are looking at this video because you're interested in buying a Haven Studio keyboard or because you've already bought one, it doesn't matter. I'd just like to thank you for your interest. And I just want to say that we build these keyboards out of love for the hobby, and we certainly hope that whether you already have one already or not, that you would go on to enjoy using these keyboards as much as we have enjoyed making them. With that aside, I'd just like to touch on what this video will cover. This video will start by talking about some of the things that you find in the package when you buy a Haven Studio keyboard kit. We will then move on to talking about how you assemble one of these keyboards, starting with the kit that's provided in the package. And we will also talk about how you maintain these keyboards and keep these keyboards clean safely and without damaging the materials. Without further ado, let's go on to the first topic, which is what's in the keyboard kit. Let's quickly talk about what's in the box before we go into assembling the keyboard. Now, what's in the box may differ slightly, but there are always at least two things. Firstly, the keyboard, like the one over here, and secondly, a small Ziploc bag of parts and spares like these fiber feet, as well as screws and any spacers that you might need for the build. Most of the time, the fasteners that you do need are already on the keyboard, as you can see over here. Other things that you might find in the box are the PCB, if you have ordered a kit, and you might also find things like these extras that I tend to chuck into the kits, like this, these plates for a loop station, which when assembled with the fasteners I've provided, look like this. Let's move on to assembling the keyboard. Now, before we do that though, take note that the keyboard does not come with the rubber feet attached. And so the first thing that you should do when you receive the keyboard and take it out of its packaging is to chuck on the rubber feet. And I'll just show you how to do that. Now, if you flip the keyboard over, and always do this on a soft surface so you don't scratch anything, you'll see that for this keyboard I've already stuck on some of the feet except one of them. So I'm just going to show you how I do that. Now, just using the rubber feet that's provided, I'll just take it off, and as you'll see on the keyboard, on the bottom side, there are markings or etchings where the rubber feet should go. And in fact, there's a bit of a depression where the rubber feet should go, and that actually helps by making sure that the rubber feet stay in place. So just make sure that when you're attaching the rubber feet, you're trying to move it and get it to go into the space that depression that's been made specifically for the rubber feet. And by doing that, you make sure it doesn't move about. Once you've attached it and it's stuck on, just push it down a little as you would with most sticky or things that you're trying to stick on with sticky tape for a couple of seconds, and that's basically it, and it's done. So just do this for all 6 or so rubber feet that's been provided to you, and you're ready to go. And now you can flip the board back over and look at the top. Now the next thing that we're going to have to do to assemble the keyboard is to firstly disassemble the case, because the PCB, which I have over here, has to go inside the board or the case underneath the plate, and you'll have to take it apart in order to do that. So whether you're using a manual screwdriver or an electric screwdriver like the one here, I'd highly recommend that when you do attempt to remove the screws, just in order to protect the keyboard and from any accidental scratches, just be really careful when you're disassembling or removing the screws. And what I do personally in order to be really careful is just put my fingers around the screw and use those fingers to guide the screwdriver bit onto the screw. And I'm just going to now start to disassemble the screws. And be careful not to lose the screws. And what I highly recommend is either use a little takeaway container or, in my case, a coaster which has a bit of a rim around it so it doesn't go anywhere and I don't lose things. So I'm just going to quickly guide my screwdriver to undo all these screws, and I'll be disassembling this keyboard to install the PCB. Okay, so now with all the screws removed, you'll find that the acrylic layers will come loose. And this is where I just want to stress that you should try to be really careful and gentle with these acrylic pieces. When assembled, they'll find they're really durable and they reinforce each other. But when disassembled, they can be quite fragile because they're quite thin as individual pieces. So just be really careful when handling these. They tend to they can break at the really thin areas like this part over here. Um, if you try to, for example, twist them or try and shift them laterally like that and distort the shape. So just be really careful when handling these. I would say just don't put a lot of pressure on it at all and leave them somewhere safe when you're assembling your keyboard. So I'm just going to move, I've just removed the top 3 layers to try and get to the metal plate over there. And I'm just going to put it in a safe spot while I work on installing the PCB. So this metal plate over here is what you want to get to. Um, just to note that this is a prototype that I've had for a long time, so it's aged and it's oxidized and it's developed a bit of a patina, which some people like. I don't mind it at all, but some people don't like it. It's just something to take note of. Brass plates and copper plates do oxidize over time, and if you don't like it, there are options. You can spray on a varnish, and there's a really good varnish that Bunnings sells that you can use, and many of my customers have used them with great success. But for me, I don't mind this edged look, um, uh, uh, but it's really up to personal preference. I would say whether you like it or not, just be really careful in terms of handling this plate. Um, the oxidation or the patina can be quite uneven. If you've, for example, got oily hands and you leave fingerprints on them, um, uh, the best thing to do is one of two things. Either um, just make sure you wash your hands and keep your hands clean while using this, and try to wipe down the metal plate with some isopropyl or alcohol rubs or wipes after you're done handling them. Or one thing that people in this keyboard community like to do is just handle these plates using gloves as well. And I recommend cloth gloves as opposed to rubber gloves because the rubber gloves do leave a residue. But just removing that metal plate, what you'll find as well is this acrylic plate that sits below it. And the reason why we have this is for 2 reasons. One is it helps you install the switches correctly, making sure that there's the right space between the PCB and the metal plate. That's the first reason. The second reason is just for better sound. When we were developing and prototyping these keyboards, we found that by having this layer and having the space between the PCB and the metal plate taken up by this acrylic plate, the sound is just a lot better. It's a lot bulkier. It's deeper. It's not as hollow. So, which is why we've designed them going forward to always have this acrylic plate sitting between the PCB and the metal plate. Um, But yep, once you take away the metal plate and the acrylic plates, which we'll be working on next, what you have left is this bottom part of the case, and it can get disassembled. And if you accidentally disassemble them, don't worry about that. You can just carefully put them back. And like I said before, just be really gentle when handling these, especially these really thin pieces right at the bottom. Um, but what I'll do is I'll just shift them aside. I'll just move them aside, and we'll come back to that later. So what we want to do is install the PCB onto these two plates, the acrylic plate and the metal plate. And the PCB that I have today, um, I've already installed the stabilizers, and of course don't forget to install the stabilizers before you attempt this, because if you move forward and you install the switches onto the plate and install them on the PCB, you'd have to disassemble, or if it's a solder PCB, you have to desolder in order to install these stabilizers. So always make sure you install the stabilizers first. Um, this PCB that I have over here has Mil-Max sockets installed already, so I'll be demonstrating this as if it were a hop swap PCB, but essentially it's the same if it was a solderable, a solder this PCB. The steps are the same. I won't talk about installing stabilizers or soldering. There are lots of really great videos out there already that talk about these and teach you how to do these. So I'll just provide the links to these videos in the description for this video. So let's go ahead. The first thing that I usually do is just line up the PCB with the plates. And when you do that, the order to do this is plate right at the very top, acrylic layer in the middle, acrylic plate in the middle, and PCB right at the bottom. And I'll just line them up so that they look somewhat aligned from the top, and that's already a good starting point. When installing the switches, whether you're soldering or whether it's a hot swap and you're just inserting the switches, I like to start from the corners, and I'll just install the first one over there, and the second one in the very opposite far corner. And what I should be doing with especially the hot swaps is installing them on the plate first so that I don't bend the pins, and then looking for the pins to and guide the pins to go into the hot swap sockets. So there you go. Now once you've installed two, it's already a lot more aligned and stable. And I think from here on, what I'll just do is just start inserting the switches, and hopefully I'm not bending any of these pins. Okay, I'd like to start by installing switches in the extreme corners, as I said, and that makes it really stable. And this is the reason why we have an acrylic plate in the middle as well. It just helps with installing these switches. Once I've had the corners done, I start to put some in the middle as well, just to make it more secure in the middle. And really, once you've done the corners and you've done the middle, you can start going nuts in terms of installing these switches. So I'm just going to fast forward and get to the end where I've already installed these switches, and let's talk about next steps. Okay, so we have installed all of the switches on this plate and PCB, and you'll find that once you do that, it's all very sturdy. The gap between the PCB and the plate is completely filled by the acrylic, and it gives it the sound profile that's really distinct with our keyboards. So once you've done that, this plate is really ready to be installed back into the case. So moving that aside, I'm just going to move the bottom part of the case back to the middle. And as I said before, if this comes disassembled because you've lifted it up and you're going, oh, yep, shit, that's okay. It's very easy to reassemble, and I'll show you how. So if this has happened, don't worry about it. What I'll do is I'll separate all of the acrylic layers to make it really simple. This should be what you should have at the bottom is the feet. So this layer over here, and you want to just make sure that you just put that down. We'll reassemble by first putting the back panel back onto the feet, and you just need to just carefully and just gently wiggle the standoffs or these things back into the holes that they belong to, and then put back the really thin layered acrylic layer by layer. So that's what I'll do if things just fall apart. And you'll see as well that the different layers have different sizes, and generally from the bottom to the top, it's getting from small to big at the and it is the biggest right at the middle where the metal plate is, and then it gets smaller at the top again. So it's a bit of a sculpted a sculpted profile. If you look at it from the side, it gets small to big in the middle, and then big to small again going to the bottom. But when you get to this, which is where we started, you've got the bottom part of the case, you've got your plate and PCB with the switches installed ready to go, and you've got these top layer acrylics ready to reinstall back and to be assembled. So let's install the plate back into the case, and this is where, again, just be really gentle so you don't scratch and damage anything. But what I'll do is I'll just align the spaces that you see at the bottom to the holes and just gently wriggle them to get them to fit in the holes. And so because mine's a prototype, the tolerances for this prototype are just a little bit tighter than yours, but still I managed to get that on pretty easily, and you should be able to as well. Don't force anything. Don't put too much pressure on things because they're not meant to. You're not meant to put any pressure on them, and you risk cracking or damaging the acrylics. Just do it really gently, and it's all about wriggling it all around until the fasteners pop into the right holes. Once you've got that on, the rest of the acrylics on the top are ready to go on as well. And again, put them on layer by layer if you can. The next layer is a slightly, it's the same size as the metal plate. The layer after that, just slightly smaller. You'll see that it's just 1 millimeter smaller than the last. And finally, the very top plate, which you know is the top plate because it's a round hole as opposed to the hex screw hole or spacer hole that you can find in the other layers. So the top layer has the round holes. And once you've done that, and it might still be a bit loose at this point, that's okay. We bring in the screws that we removed earlier, and we will start to install the screws one by one. But before I do that, just to line things up, I usually put the screws all in their places like this before I start screwing them down. Okay. Now, some of these screws might need a bit of helping to screw back in, mainly because some of the bottom, you'll see at the bottom, some of the spaces might have dropped down a little. And what I'll do is I'll just lift the case a little bit to push the spacer upwards, so the screw as well has been popped up, and that helps with screwing them down. But like before, I would use my hands to guide the screwdriver a bit onto the screw so you don't scratch anything around the screwdriver, and we can start screwing. Great. Now with the screws installed, you're almost ready to go. Just one last step I think before you install the keycaps, and that is just to check the alignment of all the acrylic layers. When installing the screws, the first time I do it, I tend to just quickly install them just to make sure that everything's put back together. But I'd like to check just before I move on to actually using it, that the layers are all aligned properly, and some of the places that you might be able to spot where it's misaligned is, for example, at the feet over here. You want to make sure that these layers, these feet layers, are flush and they're all straight, especially when you look at them from the side. I don't think the camera will focus properly, but you just want to make sure when you're looking at it from the side, it looks nice and flush. The other place that you want to check is just around the keycaps. You can actually put your finger around the edges and feel whether the acrylic layers are flush on the edges and the corners. And like I said, don't force them or anything like that. What you should do is undo, or rather loosen the screws, try and align the acrylic layers so that all these edges are flush, and tighten them back. And I'm just going to do that very quickly as a last step. So I'm just going to quickly loosen um, the screws, and you really only need to loosen them a little bit. Um, not, I'm not undoing them at all. I'm just going to turn them enough for the acrylic layers to move, so just that little bit, and then I'm going to align them, and then I'm going to tighten them again. Basically, what I want to do is just make the different layers flush. Now they're a bit loose. I can start to adjust them and just feel, you only need to be, you only need to make sure that when you feel the edges, they seem flush. That's the first thing I check, flush on these edges, but also the feet. So just make sure, just feeling the layers of the feet, they're flush both horizontally and vertically. And now that I'm more confident that they're flush, I can start to tighten them. Excellent. So now my edges are they're definitely more flush than before, and the feet is definitely more flush than before as well. So there you go. This is the complete, I guess, just missing the keycaps. This is how you assemble the keyboard, and all it's missing now is the keycaps. And once you put the keycaps on, you're done, and you're ready to use the keyboard. Okay, so now in this last part of the video, I'm going to talk just very quickly about maintenance and cleaning. Um, it's very simple. Basically, the only thing that you should use to clean your keyboard, especially the acrylic layers, uh, um, in terms of a chemical or a cleaning agent, it's isopropyl. So I have isopropyl in this spray, and what I do most of the time is I spray this onto a very soft cloth that the type of cloth that you usually find um, that comes with glasses or spectacles or sunglasses. That's the kind of cloth that I use, just because it's very gentle and it doesn't ruin the surface. And you got to be especially gentle if you have a frosted acrylic keyboard. Some of the frosted acrylic keyboards, especially the pastel colors, if you rub too hard on the surface, you can actually remove some of that matte, that frosted look, and it becomes just a little bit more less matte and more polished, and so you've got a bit of a flat spot. So just be really careful when polishing stuff, when wiping down the board. Always use a really soft cloth, and it's better to use less force, more rubs, or yep, just more repetitions, rather than really really hard rub and less repetition. So yep, only use uh, uh, isopropyl and a soft cloth to clean it. Okay, that is it in terms of what I wanted to cover as part of this video. Before I finish off, I just want to say again, thank you so much for your interest, for your support. I really look forward to answering any questions that you still might have. Please feel free to contact me either by Instagram or by Messenger via the link below. Um, and until then, have a good day, and I'll see you soon.